The whole world is a stage, and we just merely play our part. This phrase is commonly attributed to William Shakespeare, and it kind of represents the presentation of today, which is about the international actors on the global stage. And I have here for you a picture of President of the United States because he is representing precisely being one of the most important international actors um, in today's politics. Um, but let me start with the explanation. What are the nations and what are the states? When we talk about the nation, we talk about a group of people that share the same culture. By the culture, I mean that they speak the same language, or at least the majority speak the same language. They share some traditions and customs that, for example, include food, or it includes certain beliefs, etc., etc. Most of them will have a similar or related religious background, um, and most of them will share some kind of similar education. So let me give you an example. When we talk about the Mexican culture, we talk about the population that speaks Spanish language, at least the majority. They have some kind of traditions that may differ from region to region, but they all going to share some references in, like for example, gastronomy, like eating tacos, etc. In case of religion, most are Christians. I mean, both Catholic and Protestant. This is going to be the majority, or at least they share um, some of the beliefs. Like for example, the tradition to celebrate Christmas is going to be shared by the majority, even though maybe they do not go to church every Sunday. And when we talk about education, most of Mexicans they had some kind of Mexican education course, for example, Mexican history course, for example. So they know a little bit about the common culture that they all possess. And most importantly, for a nation to be considered a nation is a feeling of identity. This means that you have to feel that you really belong to this nation. This means that in order to be Mexican, you have to feel that you're Mexican. And at least at some moments, you have to feel proud of your nation, like I know when we celebrate the Independence Day that was happening recently. Then, what is a state? A state is a governmental system. Usually, it's impersonal. This means that people may change to occupy different positions, but the governmental system per se is going to be the same. It's usually structured, so there are like top and lower positions. Also, the state has the right to use violence over its citizens, or in other words, it may use the police and judges in order to punish you if you do not fulfill the local laws. The state always possessed a very defined territory. You may always check this is the end of the Mexican state and the beginning of, let's say, the United States. So there is like almost a visible line that separates two states. The state always possessed the unified laws. This means that even though we may have regional variation, like the general law is going to be the same for the whole state. The legitimacy is provided by the people. By this, I mean that the state is a legitimate entity because its people they accept being part of this state. And finally, the last and the most important thing is that the state is sovereign. It's independent. There is no higher authority that is going to tell the state what to do. On this slide, I have for you a table. It's from the secondary school history textbook. And basically, it talks about something that had emerged in the 19th century. In the 19th century, most of European countries they became nation states. This means that each nation is going to possess its own state. What this means? This means that we're going to have, for example, French people living in France, German people are going to unify into Germany. Uh, I know the majority of Spaniards they are going to be living in Spain. So all those people they are going to possess the same nationality. I mean, they're going to feel themselves as let's say Germans. They're going to speak the same language, or at least some dialect of the same language. They're going to have the same culture, which I already explained to you that different types of food, behaviors, ideas. They're going to accept to have common history, like for example, national heroes. They're going to have a dominant religion of the majority, and once again, there's going to be a very defined state that, like the defined territory where the state is going to be established. So, 19th century, Europe is going to become nation state, and this same idea is going to spread all over the world. What? Why am I talking about this? Well, it's not just because of a history class, but because today, sadly, or maybe luckily, not all nations are states, and not all states they are composed of just one nation. So we are going to have a greater variety of the interaction of these two terms. So who are the global actors? Well, of course, states are the most important global actors. When you talk about international relations, you usually think about the states. By state, I mean the political entity, like the government for example, like the United States as a state, as a country that is going to be um, a global actor. But also, we talk about the nations. The nations are also very important participants. These are the cultural entities, like, for example, the people who um, share certain culture and they live in different parts of the world. But usually, when we talk about like a nation, they live in the same place and their culture is going to be influencing, and themselves they're going to be have this idea of unity. And finally, the government as a type or the specific regime. I put here for you. Well, when we talk about regimes, we usually talk about dictators. Like, for example, historically, I don't know, maybe you remember Saddam Hussein. There were a lot of Assad, whatever dictator you would like. And as a government, as a type, a government is a type. Like, for example, when we talk if the government is democratic or non-democratic, or like of certain other type. When we talk about the importance of the state, and in order to decide which state is more important than other, we talk about the power. So, for example, usually to measure power, we have two most important criteria: the size of the population and the size of the economy. And sometimes also we talk about the size of the military, but in most cases, these two, economy and population, are going to be the most important criteria that will determine the size of the military too. So if the country has a huge population, if the country is an economic power, we talk about superpower. And today, the only superpower that possesses all the criteria to be a superpower is, of course, the United States. If the country has a relatively big population and a relatively strong economy, it's going to be um, uh, great power. For example, like China, India, and some other countries uh, going back into becoming great power. And finally, if the population is not so big but relatively big and the economy is also good but not so strong, we talk about the middle powers. The middle powers, like for example Mexico and many other countries that are doing relatively well economically and have possessed a relatively big population. But we also have examples, for example, like Great Britain, that has a quite strong economy but a very small population. This will apply to most European countries or to South Korea. Or vice versa, we have huge populations like in Pakistan, Nigeria, but the economy is not so good, so they are not going to be um, have a chance to become even, for example, middle powers. Well, in some cases they could be middle powers, but so talking about international actors, we also have actors who are not so legitimate, so to say, like for example a terrorist group, or the other criminal actors. It could be drug cartels and many more that are acting outside of of the legal boundaries. So why do they exist? Well, in most cases, it's the reasons are political or economic. It could be, for example, nationalist extremism, when a certain group is fighting for its independence, and this may create a terrorist organization or criminal organization. It could be, or most importantly, economic interests, like, for example, drug cartels. It could be also the sponsoring by other states when, for example, United States wants to destabilize a certain region and they're going to sponsor a terrorist group, like they did, for example, with the Mujahideen during the Cold War that were fighting against the Soviet Union in Afghanistan. They were sponsoring those armed rebels, even though they knew that the methods that they were using were far not the best. When we talk about actors, we talk about national and transnational actors. When we talk about those kind of actors, we talk about, well, the state actors that are located inside of the state, like the state itself, the country, its government, its people. And then we talk about non-state actors, are usually kind of international organizations. These organizations could be formed by the government or by the private interests and by the people. So let me give you some examples. First of all, we have intergovernmental organizations. What are intergovernmental organizations? Are such organizations where the governments form part as members. And the most classical example that all of you know is, of course, the United Nations. United Nations is a classical intergovernmental organization where each country is participating as a member. UN also is a general and it's global. It covers all countries of the world. But there could be, for example, some organization that specify only some particular function, like the OPEC that controls the petroleum exports, or they may have only geographical coverage, like for example, African Union, or it could be a military alliance that has also some specific purpose, only the mutual defense of its members, like the NATO organization. And then we have a great variety of non-governmental organizations, such as, for example, Red Cross, Greenpeace, Amnesty International, and many more. Once again, some of them are going to have some specific purpose, like Greenpeace to fight for like better ecology and to protect the environment, or they could have a more general interest. And finally, one of the most important actors are, of course, the commercial organizations or multinational, transnational corporations. Some of them are so big that they are located all over the world, and some of them employ huge amounts of people, thousands of people. Like, for example, when we talk about Ford, Coca-Cola, Intel, and many more, that are very important um, players on the global scene, and sometimes they, for example, they may bribe um, local governments, or they may, uh, I don't know, influence them economically, politically, etc. But individuals, do individuals matter? Yes, of course. On this picture, you see a man standing in front of the tanks. He's protesting in China. And sometimes people stand up, they like stand up against oppression, stand up for some cause. And they become more and more important day after day. And we have more and more ways to participate in the political life. So obviously through manifestations when we come on the street to protest, but we also may use internet and other media to spread our opinions. We may participate or support different national or transnational activist groups. We may actively influence public opinion through social networks or like participating in some kind of media, etc., etc. So there is a lot of ways for individuals today to express themselves. It's no longer like the um, oppressive totalitarian states of 20th century. So today we may actively participate in politics and defend the causes that we like. But yet you will say, of course, individuals are important, but the most important participants, the most important actors are, of course, the state. And there is a reason. The states are the only sovereign entities. This means that there is no one above the states and no one controls, no high authority exists that controls their actions. So that's why we talk about state-centered system. In such a system, the states at the end of the day are the main actors and they are the most important actors. But in theory, we don't have yet, but in theory, we talk about the development of a supranational organization. It's such an organization which authority is, at least in theory, is higher than the authority of the state itself. So we expect that one day we're going to create maybe some kind of legal framework maybe some kind of, I don't know, trade organization that is going to control the state. Today, we may have examples of organizations that moving towards this direction, like for example, the World Trade Organization that may, in a certain way, in some situations at least, tell the states what to do, what not to do, or the European Union that is also moving towards some kind of creation of united European government. It didn't happen yet, but it's a possibility. So, like summarizing, this is what I was talking about. So we have different types of actors. When we talk about international and transnational actors, we talked about intergovernmental organizations, non-governmental organizations, multinational corporations. We talk about empowered individuals who could be celebrities or just normal people fighting for a cause. It could be also the criminal actors, like we talked about. On the national level, we have itself the state, the national government, the people, and we expect that one day we are going to have probably a supranational organization that will be above the authority of